Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person today, but I'm delighted that I will be able to listen in on the presentation virtually. So I'd like to welcome everyone in person and online to the ISSP's second action dialogue of the 2025-2026 academic year. This new series, focused on science, diplomacy, and foresight, is the next phase of Confluences, an ISSP initiative we launched in 2023. Confluences takes a strategic, innovative approach to knowledge mobilization at the intersection of science, society, and policy. Pour ceux et celles qui ne me connaissent pas, je m'appelle Monica Gattinger. Je suis directrice de l'Institut de recherche sur la science, la société et les politiques publiques. Aujourd'hui, cet événement va avoir lieu en anglais, mais si jamais vous avez des questions en français, soyez-vous bien à l'aise de les poser dans la langue de votre choix. We'll begin today with the University of Ottawa's Indigenous affirmation. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders past, present, and future. So for those who aren't familiar with the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy, we're a cross-faculty institute at the University of Ottawa, focusing on that intersection between science, society, and policy. So we look at everything from policies for science, technology, and innovation, to governance of emerging technologies, to evidence-based or evidence-informed decision-making. Our strategic vision, we're in the final year of a 5-year strategic plan. Our strategic vision is to help Canada address grand challenges by transforming decision-making, strengthening relationships among science, society, and policy leaders. So many of you have participated in our Confluences Grand Challenge Action Dialogues to date. We've explored a variety of themes and topics, from the science-society relationship to disruption to equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as science diplomacy. When we met with a number of you last spring to discuss next steps for Confluences, you expressed a desire for an impact-focused series. We heeded that call and have created a series this year with a special focus on science diplomacy that's underpinned by a collaborative foresight exercise. This is the second dialogue in that series, and the series we call Science Diplomacy in Action. I'd really like to take an opportunity to thank the University of Ottawa's Office of the Vice President, Research and Innovation for its support of this series through a Shirk Exchange Grant and a Trebek Fellowship funded by the Alex Trebek Forum for Dialogue. I believe we have with us today in person in the room Dr. Cynthia Quiroga, who heads the OVPRI's Office for Research and Public Policy Outreach. Support from Cynthia's office through the Alex Trebek Fellowship has helped us to hire a graduate fellow at the Institute, Valeria Vasilyeva, who I saw earlier on the screen. She is an MD, PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Medicine. Valeria is with the Institute 1 day per week, and among other things, she is supporting science diplomacy in action. One of the other things Valeria is working on is a training hub at the Institute on Science, Society, Policy. The hub is a unique training offering for those interested in learning more about science policy and science-society relations. It's largely a self-directed online training program with a combination of written and audio-visual materials. So you may be wondering, well, why are you talking about this, Monica? We're not here to talk about the hub, but I did want to raise it because we launched the hub a few weeks ago. I think it will be of interest to many of those in attendance, whether graduate students, early career researchers, early career or new to science policy practitioners in government, embassies, consulates, and other parts of the science policy ecosystem. So please visit our website if you're interested. So today, I'm really excited for this discussion today. Our focus is on the state of Canada's science, technology, and innovation ecosystem. And we are delighted to partner once again with the Council of Canadian Academies to offer this session, which features the findings of the CCA's Expert Panel on the state of science, technology, and innovation in Canada. So I don't see Tace in the room. Jeff, is Tace there? Okay. Oh, there you are. Hello, Tace. Okay. So it's now my pleasure to turn things over to CCA President and CEO, Dr. Tace Kreutzberg, to share some opening remarks on behalf of the Council. Tace, over to you.
Thank you, Monica. Bonjour à tous. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui et au nom de le Conseil des Académies canadiennes. Je vous remercie de nous avoir invités à participer à vos dialogues sur l'action. And thanks again, Monica. Really, it's great to be here and to be collaborating with this group. And we are very grateful here to have also with us Ilse Treurnicht, Chair of the Expert Panel on the State of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Technology Innovation Canada, to speak to the report. Now, for some of you who may not know, Ilse is a longstanding leader in Canada's STI ecosystem, and she's assumed a range of roles in different parts of the system, and we're very honored to have her as the chair of the panel. Now, before I hand over the mic to Ilse, I'd like to share a few words about what you're about to hear. First, this report that was released about 2 weeks ago, 250-page report, is the fifth in a series that goes back to 2006. And it's a series that essentially has been asking the same question through that time period, and that is essentially, what is the state of science, technology, and innovation in Canada? And with this report there, we have some continuity here in the analysis over time, and that's really helping us to understand what has changed and what has not changed in that time period. Now, and second is a bit about process. This report is the work of a panel of experts, and they're multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral experts who spent over a year in conversation, reviewing and testing, and really trying to make sense of the vast amount of data on this topic. And I'm sure some in this room can appreciate the challenge at hand. And so there were 14 members of the panel, and there were another 14 peer reviewers who reviewed this report, and I think generating 700+ comments, 800 comments on this report that the panel reviewed. So this is an exercise in thoroughness, and every part of it has been scrutinized in depth. So, finally, for those that may be less familiar with the CCA, there are no recommendations in this report in keeping with the CCA's mandate. And it is partly for this reason that this has been an enduring series for the CCA. We know many groups across the government rely on the data and the analysis in this report to make decisions within their respective institutions. And so now, what does this report say? And then for that, I'll hand it over to you, Ilse.
Thank you very much, Tace, and huge thanks to Monica and the ISSP for hosting us today. Very much appreciate the chance to share with you some of the findings, which I appreciate, you will appreciate is presented here in a fairly high level, given what Tace has shared about the sort of volume of the report and the level of data. So encourage all of you to dig into the parts of the report that's most relevant to you. But I particularly appreciate the opportunity also to hear some responses from some of our international partners. So maybe we can just start with revisiting the chart. As Tace has mentioned, this is part of a series, and so there's continuity in the overall work of the panel in creating this sort of series of data. But also just want to acknowledge the support from ISED and a number of other departments for referring this to the CCA. The last report was published in 2018, which I think we would all agree is a very, very long time ago in the life of science, technology, and innovation. I also just want to acknowledge that we received some additional support from SSHRC, and that enabled us to go a little deeper and a little wider in our analysis compared to prior years, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. The charge is outlined in the report, and it has a number of sort of subcategories, but broadly speaking, the question in front of the panel was, what is the state of science, technology, and innovation in Canada, and how does it compare internationally? And some of the sub areas, of course, is what are some of the enduring and emerging strengths? Where are we starting to fall behind? Where are we making investments, and how do those compare to where others are making investments? And then more specifically, some of the unique features of our distributed science, technology, and innovation ecosystem that both enable and limit potentially some of our performance, and where are some of the barriers and knowledge gaps. So a fairly broad charge, and I think it's important also to remind ourselves that this charge was given to CCA in the late spring of last year, and so the panel started its work in the early summer of 2024. And a lot, of course, has changed since then. The panel itself was convened by the CCA, so 14 members, 2 international panel members distributed across the country, and a wide range of experiences and expertise in innovation, data and measurement, as well as post-secondary research. And I can certainly report that this was a very engaged and thoughtful panel, and we much appreciate all the work that they put in. On evidence gathering, I would say at a high level compared to prior assessments, we took a little bit more of a deeper dive into some of the innovation literature, where some of the previous reports, particularly the earlier ones, were a little bit more focused on the sort of front end of the innovation pipeline. And we also had the opportunity to look at some new data from StatsCan. Including in this particular report, we included some firm level data on particularly R&D expenditures. For the first time, the panel also looked at risk capital funding for some of our most promising ventures, and that gives us some insight into a growing cohort of SMEs. We went a little bit beyond the standard US Patent Office to include also the European Patent Office. And then on the bibliometric analysis, Scopus was continued to be the main bibliometric analysis as compared to prior years, but it was complemented in this case by OpenAlex, which gives us wider coverage, and I think is a particularly interesting new insight into some of the subcategories where Canada has strength. We also used Overton for understanding the impact of scholarly literature on policy, and then Web of Science for looking at regional analysis, which is interesting. Prior reports particularly focused on sort of the provincial level data, but of course we know in the innovation space concentrated geographies are important, and so the Web of Science gave us more CMA level data. On the commission papers, a funding grant from SSHRC through its Strategic Initiatives Fund gave us a chance to dive into some of the sort of adjacent and key topics. The panel prioritized some of these CCA sourced experts. The panel provided a little bit of input on the early drafts, and those are published now as complementary pieces to the report, and particularly, again, the use of OpenAlex and Overton there might be of interest to particularly this audience. We also recognize that standard STI measurement and are not very well suited to understanding the contribution of Indigenous knowledge to STI in Canada. We also felt that our panel was not qualified or did not have the scope to do this topic justice, but we did want to make sure that we had some input, and so again, with SSHRC support, we were able to convene a very interesting group of of Indigenous leaders, covering both the sort of scholarship aspect as well as entrepreneurship and innovation intermediaries. And we hope that was just a bit of a first step in a topic that, of course, deserves its own study and analysis. Data, I think one of the, as an outside person coming into this report and spending the last year deeply immersed in this data room, I think it was a bit of an eye-opener for all of the panel members on just how complex it is to get at this data. You realize that almost everything you say as a simple statement needs caveats. The data is super nuanced, and certainly we tried really hard with the support of the CCA Secretariat to capture that nuance and present the data as accurately as possible with the limitations that it presents. But the reality is that international comparisons in particular have to be looked at very carefully, because although some of these comparisons look similar, they are not conducted in country in a similar fashion, which can, of course, distort the data. We also felt that a lot of, on some key contemporary issues, and this was a big challenge in the report, the data is just not yet available. If you think about AI or some of the shifts in our immigration policy, some of the unfolding issues around higher education funding, these were all unfolding as we conducted the research, and we simply do not yet have the data to capture those. And of course, some of the data is also lagging. So those were some of the challenges that were presented. The panel decided to take, as many others are doing around the world, to take an ecosystem view of the STI ecosystem rather than the sort of more traditional linear model, recognizing that introduces some additional data messiness because we're not only looking at the intersection of business, governments, and academia, but we're also trying to think about the impact on civil society. But then, of course, the STI ecosystem works in multiple lens scales, from very local to regional to national and global. And it's not just what we do in Canada, but it's what we're doing relative to what everyone else is doing. And there are a very, very wide variety of actors in that ecosystem. And the ecosystem also is a little bit like a living system. It is nonlinear, it's dynamic, it is very deeply relational, and some of the interventions will need to respond both to external pressures and changes from within, and likely will need some adaptation over time. Of course, that's not how many of our interventions in the STI ecosystem are designed. They tend to be fairly prescriptive, fairly mechanistic, and very transactional. So these are some of the challenges and areas of dissonance. When you think about this picture also in the context of Canada, it's hard not to be reminded of our particularly unique feature of our huge geography, not very large population, and a population that is highly concentrated in certain urban areas. So there certainly are some unique features bringing this model into the Canadian context. The other part, which I've alluded to a little bit, and I will say was a key challenge for the panel, was this sort of unfolding of a whole set of new drivers that will particularly impact the STI ecosystem going forward. So although this is not a report about productivity or Canada-US relationships or AI, these were clearly key drivers. We can remind ourselves that the report was commissioned at a time when our senior deputy governor of the Bank of Canada referred to Canada's productivity crisis as a national emergency. But this was pre-elections in Canada and the US. It was also pre-artificial intelligence sort of becoming more of a consumer facing technology. So So we know the STI ecosystem plays a really important role in addressing productivity, particularly around the area of adoption of new innovations. We also have seen these huge shifts in the Canada-US relationship. And at the same time, we have a heavily integrated STI ecosystem. Everything from the way we do science together, all the way to how we fund some of our most promising companies, of course, to trade and export. So, and the current level of uncertainty is obviously creating very significant issues. And then artificial intelligence, where Canada has a storied history of discovery. We're now at the stage where the adoption of artificial intelligence is a worldwide phenomenon, and it will certainly shape everything from how we do science to how we conduct business, etc. The panel also looked at a number of other drivers, of course, the evolving structure of the economy with the shift to intangibles, shift to services, ripples and hangover from the pandemic fit into this period. And of course, misinformation, disinformation, and the politicization of science was another key factor to consider. And then, as I mentioned, these sort of ecosystem challenges, post-secondary funding crisis being just one example. And I will say that for the panel, part of our challenge was delivering on the charge, which was looking hard at the data. And as I mentioned, some of the data, is a little bit stale. So capturing that picture, at the same time, making sure that we capture the urgency and the shifts underway, at least at the narrative level. And that was certainly something we wrestled with, and you will be the judge whether we struck the right balance there. Findings, where Canada stands. I would say much like the CCA's 2018 panel report, we again show our incredible talent base, highly educated population, strong performance on research outputs and the quality of those research outputs, continued high levels of funding for higher education R&D, and on the negative side, continued low performance on government and business R&D, and alarmingly in this particular time period, further declining numbers in both of those. We still see ongoing challenges with talent and IP leaving Canada, which was also captured in the 2018 report. In terms of new findings, I think one piece that is very interesting is that we certainly have a segment of our SME population that is growing quite rapidly and is intensifying from an R&D spending perspective, and that is obviously promising as a sort of a new economy growth trend. And we have uncovered, of course, this very limited access to domestic financing, which through the funding data points to particular challenges for this cohort of high performing SMEs. And then where we have really new data is around low and declining levels of technology adoption, both in business and government. So this is not a positive picture for Canada in terms of pointing to its productivity issues. So those are the high level findings, and we can peel the onion a little bit further in just this overview. So if we go to education and talent, this remains a good news story for Canada. Highly educated population, solid employment of those graduates, at least according to this data. And this is a real strength. However, as you can see, Asterix is populating here. We have sort of an ongoing measurement challenge, comparing Canada's education levels with post-secondary qualifications compared to other OECD countries, because we include CEGEP here, and so we look artificially high. But even with that caveat, of course, we have a highly educated population. We fall behind at graduate levels compared to the OECD average, and that is concerning. And in particular, although we attract a lot of very talented international graduate students as well and develop our own, we lose some of them between grad school and employment. I will just put here that these performance numbers are encouraging and so on, but our data here only goes to 2022, and we know that a lot has happened in the post-secondary sector since then. The panel also had some light skepticism around these employment numbers, just because they are somewhat dissonant with some of the other performance numbers for researchers in business. And we wonder whether some of that is due to the way we categorize employees in the business sector because of the significant size of the SHRED program. But we couldn't verify that. If we go to R&D expenditures, I think this is where we really have a bleak picture for Canada, in particular with the growing and very striking gap of Canada's BIRD spending, so business expenses in R&D relative to the OECD average, and also relatively weak and declining government spending levels at the bottom of this chart. And you can see a slight uptick in Canada in the last 2-3 years prior to 2023, but we didn't keep pace with the increase of the OECD average, and so the gap has not closed. We do continue to perform high on the higher education R&D spending, which has been also prevalent in prior years, but as highlighted in the Fundamental Science Review and the Bouchard report, this does again require a bit of an asterisk in that not all countries measure HERD the same way. And as you can see, table 3.1 in our report highlights the fact that the funding model of Canadian universities and colleges relies very heavily on student fees for both operations and research. And now with sort of the mounting funding crisis facing post-secondary institutions in the country, we know that that particular lever of driving HERD funding is under stress. So that just is a qualification here. But the big story here is just the continued decline on BIRD. If we look at industrial R&D a little bit more carefully, you also see that some of this is due to the structure of our economy, in that R&D is performed to a very high degree, and particularly compared to the United States among SMEs in Canada, and a relatively low share in large enterprises. So, in short, we don't have enough domestic large enterprises in R&D intensive sectors, and some of that is structural. However, it is, it doesn't explain the full story. The R&D expenditures in SMEs, we see this very encouraging increase over the last 5-6 years. It was a little bit frustrating for us because we were looking very hard at what we can say about that. But we don't at the moment have enough data to really understand the composition, or reliable data to really understand the composition of that cohort of SMEs. And this is obviously something that from a policy perspective is really important for us to understand. Pockets of that data live inside IRAP, inside accelerators, etc. But we need a comprehensive look at the data and really understand what those companies do, because many of them are not properly characterized either by some of our tools. The larger firms is also an interesting story. Foreign multinational firms in Canada play a really big role in our economy, and particularly this is evident in the levels of business expenses on R&D. They have increased their spending at a faster rate than domestic large firms. And although there's some concern about the potential for leakage of both economic benefit as well as intellectual property and talent, there's no question that these foreign multinational firms who typically come here because of the quality of our talent, they contribute to our economy on a number of different levels, including providing high quality employment to Canadians and contributing to the domestic economy. This steep decline in R&D is no doubt that partly due to the shift from manufacturing. If you look back to the early sort of 2006 first report, you see very high level of concentration in manufacturing, and we have not retooled our R&D ecosystem for a sort of a modern manufacturing sector. And this is not unique to Canada, but you see this also in the industrial R&D strength area, where many of the areas of strength are in scientific research and development services, ICT services, manufacturing, machinery manufacturing, and so on. So again, very service oriented, and just a quick the size of the bubbles show here strength based on in those subsectors, and then intensity that move along the x-axis and growth rate on the y-axis. And the data period here is 2018 to 2022. So the shift to services is very pronounced in the data, and there are lots of different layers in which that's teased out. I have mentioned the new chapter on financing and startups, which was included here, recognizing that only a small subset of SMEs receive angel or venture capital or private equity funding, but they tend to be the science and technology intensive high growth firms. And so we felt it was important to understand where those companies are accessing their capital and what some of the issues are that they're facing. Just a very high level sort of view of this as a first brush is risk capital is always concentrated, and startup ecosystems are concentrated in larger CMAs, and the story of Silicon Valley is legendary in this context. But it is interesting that Canada's risk capital concentrates very heavily in our three largest centers. In fact, more than half of it is in Toronto and Montreal combined. So again, networks is something we really have to think about in terms of the access to capital side as well. What we have seen is that constrained financing for both early stage companies and those looking to scale has been a real issue for Canadian firms, and many seek out financing from international sources, particularly from the United States. This is not a bad thing, because access to those foreign investors or particularly US investors often help those companies access those markets, access customers, access talent, etc. But in a new era of sovereignty, and if you elevate your point of view slightly, and we now look at this cohort of highly financed scaling firms, we see that US investors actually own a much larger piece of these firms than Canadian investors do. And that is a real challenge, particularly if we also want to make sure that we create the conditions so that they can scale internationally from a Canadian context. In 2021, there was a real peak in venture capital in Canada, but there's been a real pullback. And so just for this moment in time, and perhaps for this audience, also something that is relevant to companies spinning out of academic centers right now, or very early stage companies, we are seeing a quite significant, very early stage funding gap that has opened up as well. And so when you look at these factors, it's really not it's not too surprising that there's a heated debate going on in the technology sector about how do we mobilize more capital from our own financial sources, including pension funds. The other feature that is important, again, from an STI perspective, is that financing over the last 15 years has gone predominantly to ICT-based startups, and we now see the flywheel there of repeat entrepreneurs, repeat investors that have done very well. But it remains a very significant challenge for companies coming out of more capital-intensive fields, such as life sciences or deep tech, where we just don't have these large, slightly more patient pools of capital that can support them at the right scale through their development and commercialization cycles. So first look at financing and startups, I think another area that deserves further investigation into the future. So that's kind of the input side. If we now look at the output side, what do we get for our herd? On the publication side, Canada continues to perform very well. We're 0.5% of the world's population. We produce a significant volume, as well as based on citations, high quality research. That output has grown and continued to grow over the investigation period, but it's slower than the global average, and no surprise to this audience that we're seeing just a massive growth from places like China, India, and Russia in publication output, and so we can expect this picture to change. And Canada's sort of lagging on the growth side is common among other industrialized nations as well. Interesting feature is Canada's a very strong collaborator on the research front. Over 50% of our publications include a foreign author. That's 40% for OECD average, and that's very positive. But again, that piece might change quite significantly because of the changes in the funding system with our largest collaborator, which is the United States. And we also know that there's been growing concerns about research security, and countries like China and Iran, who are big collaborators with Canada, are on that watch list. So that is an issue to watch. Publication strengths based on both specialization and citation-based impact. Very strong in the health sciences, both clinical medicine as well as health services and public health. And then information and communications technology, not too surprising. These are important pieces of an innovation economy. And again, would really encourage people to look at the Open ALEX nuanced view of this. If we go to patents, we see similarly Canada does reasonably well, not quite as well as on the publication side. We're 8th in the world. We were 7th in 2018, so slight decline. Our output has grown, but again, far surpassed by the output from China, India, and Russia. Our patents are well ranked in terms of citation, and we continue to have an ongoing issue with intellectual property outflows. And there, of course, the contribution of foreign multinationals who perform a lot of R&D here is certainly one of the likely explanations. Is that many of these patents are owned by foreign entities from the beginning, and similarly, the lack of large R&D intensive firms who could better absorb some of our patents, and then SMEs who are perhaps less equipped to absorb new patents or acquire new patents and use them is another factor. Canadians prioritize still the US Patent Office over the European Patent Office, and so we focus most of our analysis there. And then on patent strengths, electrical engineering, largest number, but declining a little bit. Mechanical engineering is strong and growing. We're very good in instrumentation. All of these are, again, foundational to a more broad-based innovation economy. And there's a fair bit of nuance also on the CMA locations of patenting in the report that might be of interest to some of you. I think the big story in the report and where we've been able to access some new data is around the innovation performance, and again, tricky to get at this data in a quantitative way and in a way that is comparable to international jurisdictions. But We have benefited from a new survey conducted by StatsCan, the Survey of Innovation and Business Strategy, or the SIB survey, which StatsCan implemented in 2015. And 2 years of data collection report, then another 2 years, and so on. So we've now had 3 of those reports, and they are sort of new to this report. And it gives us a bit of the sort of progression of innovation activities in the Canadian business sector. It also uses the Oslo manual, which is similar to the European comparisons. And although the survey is conducted a little bit differently in Europe, we can't quite use it for international collaborations, but we know these are some of the metrics that are tracked elsewhere as well. And I think here is the concerning part of the picture, is we see a significant decrease in recent years. Although people are spending more, which may say innovation is not quite, we have productivity challenges on the innovation front as well. But we see broad-based of sort of innovation activities declining. And then secondly, the acquisition, development, and use of technologies have also significantly declined, particularly in recent years, and small companies struggle in particular. And the SIB survey not only asks businesses about the nature of these different activities, they also ask them about some of the obstacles to innovation. And there, where the firms point out that the main and persistent obstacle is uncertainty and risk and lack of skills, that is repeated over and over. And they did not cite obtaining or enforcing IP as a significant obstacle, and this is perhaps the most problematic finding. The most common reason for not using advanced technologies by some significant margin is that it's not viewed as critical to the future of the business. And so I think this is an area where clearly we have some very interesting questions from a policy perspective for everyone. And it also highlights that this is not a problem that government's going to fix on its own. So there has to be a new collaborative approach to really unpacking this issue. The charge asked us also to opine on ecosystem barriers, and there's a lot to be said about ecosystem barriers, and we did sort of try to dive into it a little bit. But given the productivity issues and the correlation with technology adoption, obviously low rates of technology adoption is a continued challenge for us. Artificial intelligence is the new wave of potential enhancements to productivity issues in every sector, and not just in R&D intensive sectors, but also public sector, nonprofit sector, everywhere. But we have to be cognizant of the unique challenge that AI adoption is, or adoption generally, is not a muscle that we have clearly kept in good shape in Canada. And so how we go about this will require some real thought. The lack of large firms in innovative sectors is obviously a huge piece of this puzzle, and in that sense, this growing cohort of young firms that are R&D intensive and growing is really important, and it will be important for us to do whatever we can to help them grow big and be sticky here in Canada. And therefore, the limited access to domestic financing is an important issue that needs to be addressed. And if we don't address the really critical early stage gap that is unfolding at the moment, we will likely see, we could skip another generation of high growth SMEs. The importance of regional strengths really comes out in the CMA analysis, and our economy is highly diverse across the country, and there are areas of real strength in different parts of the country. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all, obviously, and figuring out how we can anchor these large firms in the right context and give them the unique supports that they need, both from a sector perspective, but also from a regional perspective, is a really key piece. And of course, that then brings us to the wide variety of public sector supports. And, do we have the right tailoring of those programs to achieve what we need to achieve going forward? I do want to just focus a little bit more on the knowledge gaps, because I think, from speaking on behalf of everyone on the panel, we felt extremely strongly that we need to get a much more robust analytical capacity to understand what is happening in real time, given the pace of change, given the multiple challenges that we're facing at the moment, and given this sort of fast emerging issues, including artificial intelligence as just one example, shifts in our trade relationships as another. We need some real-time dynamic tools to much better understand what's working, what's not working, and how can we better make decisions and adapt to the changing conditions. We simply, from my perspective, certainly, we cannot wait for another stick report 6 years from now to tell us whether the interventions we're making in the next 2-3 years are working. And then I think the set of conditions we're facing now really questions the effectiveness, and a need to really look at all of our STI policy and program suite to see what we need to change, because doing more of the same is just not going to get us where we need to be. I mentioned initially on the ecosystem side that we did include sort of the civil society perspective. We did do a little bit more work around some of the emerging frameworks that really take into account the social impacts of the STI ecosystem. It was just beyond the scope of the sort of challenge to wrap our arms around the economic piece of this puzzle. But it is an area that certainly some of our panel members felt very strongly about, and that I think deserves further analysis. And again, I know there's some real strength at the University of Ottawa in this field. So conclusions, I'm sure every panel member has their own set of reflections. But the reality is, our productivity crisis is very significant. We're facing a new set of challenges that were not past a part of sort of what got us here. And alarmingly, based on this report, many of our indicators are going in the wrong direction. So this is, we're approaching this new set of challenges with arguably with a weak hand. And at a high level, the incredible strengths we have on the talent side and on the research side is just still not being converted by the Canadian economy into downstream economic benefits. I think that is the crux of the matter. But this is not a moment to think about, do these create the right burning platform? Frankly, from my perspective, the platform is burning, because if we don't do something about this and course correct, we will not be able to maintain the standard of living and the values that Canadians have expected from their public health system, etc. And it is a challenging story, but we do have this extraordinary talent and research strength base, which is not to be sneezed at, because it is the foundation of a thriving STI system. And that is our opportunity, is to really harness the capacity of this extraordinary Canadian population, diverse, highly educated, to not only produce new knowledge, but also to engage with the knowledge of the world, to build a thriving STI ecosystem. And then to really nurture this new group of SMEs that over time may shift our economy. And there's no question that AI will play a big role in that process. So let me pause and just again thank the sponsors. I also just want to give a big shout out to the team at CCA who supported the expert panel. They were a huge pleasure to work with, and very, very good at what they do.
Okay, thank you, Ilse. That was a very comprehensive and fascinating look at this monster of a report. So I appreciate the detail that you went into, because it will no doubt spawn a lot of good conversations here. For this next segment, what we'd like to do is welcome 3 science attachés here in Ottawa to give their reflections or remarks. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end to open it up for questions from the online audience. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing and conveying their very impressive bios, but let me just say a couple of words in the order that you're seated, and then I'll turn it over to you. So first we'll hear from Costanza Conti. She's a professor of numerical analysis at the University of Florence, and has been the scientific attaché at the Italian Embassy in Ottawa since January 2023.
Correct.
So welcome, Costanza. Then we will hear from Kathy Shield. Since September of 2024, she has been the Science, Technology, and Health Officer at the US Mission in Canada, where she focuses on issues such as AI, quantum, nuclear, biotech, space, and research security. So welcome, Kathy. Just a few files. And then finally, we'll hear from David Barnes, who arrived at the British High Commission in Ottawa in August 2022. So I guess you're the dean of the group here.
Yeah.
And at the British High Commission, David heads up the Science, Energy, and Climate team. So welcome and thank you for coming, David. So just how about
We can start. So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jeff, for keeping inviting me in these events. I'm very happy, and it was a great opportunity for me also to investigate a little bit the state of science, technology, and innovation of the Italian landscape. And we don't have an organization like CCA in Italy, but we have a department of our National Research Center, CNR, Consiglio Nazionale di Ricerca, which is producing time to time a report. And so yesterday I checked a little bit what they have done. It's essentially the Department of Social Science and Humanities that, with support from the Minister of University Research, created this document. And it's the idea is similar to the report you have. So it serves as a guiding tool for policymakers, hopefully at least. And and they outline, I read, only the summary, the initial summary, but I can share with you if you are interested, because it's a very nice document, impressive one. And they outline the priority on which Italy should work and invest more. And some of them are very similar to the one that are given in the report of CCA. So the first one is promoting human capital, because I think we have a problem in Italy, which is even more evident than the problem you have here in Canada. We have a low number of graduates, and that they are particularly attracted abroad. So we really have a brain drain problem, which is not compensated by an attraction, because Italy has a limited international attraction and a democratic decline. So not democratic, sorry, demographic decline. So this is going to be a big problem in the next, let's say, 10 years. Another problem they outline is the need of reinforcing the quality and the continuity of research. And this is particularly true in the last 4 or 5 years, because we had an important economical support within the Next Generation EU program after pandemic. And once this will be at the end, so next year, at the end of 2026, everything, we need really to think about how we can continue the work done within this program. And then another aspect is we need to be more effective integrating the productive system with the scientific one. And last but not least, we need to promote inclusion and equity as drivers of competitiveness. The positive aspect that is put in evidence in the report is that this recovery plan that was supported by the European Union, that is named PNRR in Italy, so Piano Nazionale Resilienza e Resistenza, really gave a lot of economical support. Just to give you an idea, it's all the plan is 194 billions of euro. And for the pillars related to research and innovation, were allocated 30 billion of euro, and particularly around 9 billion of euro to reinforce university research and interaction with the private sector. So this was really a great opportunity for Italy. I think the best in the last 10 years. And something that may be interesting for Canada is that with this money were created several national centers, like sort of clusters of universities, NGO, industry, research center, actually 5 national center, 14 extended partnerships, and 11 innovation ecosystems. And these were very important because in a way, they also helped us to rebalance the gender and regional differences that are always present in Italy. So the difference between the North and the South, and the low representation of women, in particularly in the STEM sector. Why? Because to create such, for example, national center was an obligation to involve university from several areas of Florence. Sorry, not of Florence, of Italy. Florence is my city. And so was somehow pushing the creation of different type of coalitions. And this could help, for example, because I noticed that you don't have much of interaction between provinces, for example, which is, I think, probably pity. In Italy, this really, for example, I was at the very beginning when I was back in Italy, part of the National Center for High Performance Computing. And yeah, we were involving university in Sicily, in the very south, because it was a request for the creation of the center. Yeah, and another thing I want to discuss with you is the evaluation system for our research. That it's peculiar, I think. We have an agency that was created by the Minister of University Research. It's called ANVUR. It's an agency for the evaluation of the research. And every 5 years, so this year is the third round of evaluation. So we had evaluation for 10 years. All researchers are asked to submit, let's say, in average, 3 of their best publications. So we submit our publication through the institution we belong with. And this agency evaluate our publications. And then at the end, gathering all the information of all researchers of the institution, every department is evaluated, and the research funds are given proportionally to the result of the evaluation. So, and at the beginning, we were a little bit, shocked by the first round of evaluation, but it was 2015, but then somehow this forced every department, every research group to rethink about the way we were doing research, the way we were approaching journals, for example, for publication, how was our international engagement in research group. And so I think at the end there was a way to push the research activity in the right direction. And maybe at least this is what is reported in the CNR report, is that probably there was a small disadvantage with respect to disciplinarity, because the evaluation is bibliometric, and so some this more multidisciplinary domain are a little bit suffering. But it really gave to all researchers a moment to think about how, I mean, the best way to publish, how we should go with the research. So this could also be an idea that Canada could explore.
Thank you, Costanza. Yeah.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for convening us. Thank you to Ilse for an excellent review of the 250-page report, which I did not read all 250 pages. I know, disappointing. I'm very sorry. So as Jeff mentioned, I am the Science, Technology, and Health Officer here in Ottawa at the U.S. Embassy. But prior to joining the State Department, I worked extensively in nuclear innovation in the United States, and did that based mostly in Silicon Valley before and during my PhD. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I think it's a really interesting perspective, particularly given the conversation right now in Canada around increasing competitiveness and particularly the risk appetite in investment. I know that there's lots of brilliant ideas across that whole range of topics that Jeff mentioned that I cover, that there's lots of capacity, there's lots of research, lots of people who want to do spin-outs here in Canada. And then I hear from people that there's not enough capital, right? That's part of what's in the report. I also have heard from people that the concern with capital is that capital that exists wants to invest in the sure risk, that the capital is more interested in investing in something that might get really big, but will definitely give you some small rate of return, rather than investing in something that could skyrocket, but could also crash and burn, right? And I think that is very similar to what I remember seeing when I first started working in nuclear innovation. The nuclear industry has a very similar fear, particularly the established industry, because one nuclear disaster impacts everyone across the industry. We saw that with Fukushima, where it didn't only affect every operating reactor in Japan, but also affected reactors and economy, the nuclear industry across the world, negatively impacted nuclear startups at all stages. I think the challenge in nuclear was a little bit different, because there are physical risks that can be addressed and considered in kind of the regulatory process. Whereas there are physical risks, but there were also policy risks. And so some of the policy concerns that we saw when I started working on this back in 2015 were focused on federal investment needs, and we were looking at opportunities for stepwise federal investment that could help support the nuclear industry in de-risking at different steps, and what the federal government could do in that process. And that has been supported since 2015 by each subsequent administration and remains supported today. There were also psychological challenges that needed to be addressed within the nuclear industry with a mindset shift. And that was a big part of what we tried to do by creating the Nuclear Innovation Bootcamp back in 2015, which was focused on training students who had been steeped in the nuclear industry in risk assessment and risk mitigation and management, to think about investment opportunities, to think about designing business cases, and to think kind of bigger picture about not only the tangible risks, but the possible rewards. Definitely some of those students in that program were Canadian. Many of the people that we had come speak to that program were Canadian, and some of those nuclear companies ended up being founded here in Canada. And it seems to me like there's a parallel that can be drawn here between that kind of nuclear innovation ecosystem of 2015 and the Canadian innovation ecosystem now, in terms of what needs to be done to catalyze a similar type of mindset shift in terms of risk assessment. That the risk reward isn't all about the risk. We also have to think about what are the rewards, and not only in a financial way. In this way, it's not necessarily like in nuclear, a set of challenges that can be solved with Monte Carlo assessments or fracture tests, which is what we did a lot of. But I do think that there is a place, I'm really glad that Valeria is here. There's a place for students and for young people, for academia to think about changing what an entire generation of startups, but also investors are thinking about what they're investing in and what they're betting on, and what is not just the financial risk, but the societal reward. So I say that obviously it's not my place to sit here and speak to a bunch of really smart Canadians about what Canada should do. But it is obviously a conversation that's being had by everyone in this room, by those who are on the panel that put together the CCA report. And I have no doubt that Canada has the capacity. Like I talk to all of these brilliant innovators, people that are looking for investors and investment every day. I think it's really evident that, and again, as the CCA report lays out, right, you've got excellent researchers, excellent universities, lots of really good ideas. Patents are coming, right? Patents are here in Canada. It's true in nuclear. Canada has some of the best nuclear technology, nuclear capacity, without which, I mean, the UK and the US and Canada work together on nuclear in all sorts of ways. So I just think there are some policy choices that can be made. I know that the government has presented some of them in the budget that just came out, ideas about ways to go forward to prioritize and develop domestic capacity here in Canada. And I know that governments have a big role to play, without a doubt, but I work in government now, so I'm allowed to say this. Government can't be like what's pushing this forward. And again, this is, Ilse just said this, the catalyst needs to come from this room. It needs to come from outside government. It needs to come from the investors, the startups, the R&D shops in industry. Government doesn't move fast enough, and that's not a failure. That's the system working the way it's supposed to. So I hope that this report, this conversation can start some of these conversations outside of this room as well, about where we can work together on investment, where we can work together on investing in riskier things, because a growing Canadian economy it's great for Canada, it's good for the US, so we want to grow together.
Excellent, thank you, Kathy. We'll go to David, but just before I do, also just giving you a heads up that we're going to come back to you for final remarks after David's remarks.
Ready or not? Yeah.
So it's a shame that you did that before I spoke, rather than before everybody else spoke. I'm sure their comments would be much more interesting. But yes, as Jeff introduced, David Barnes, I'm from the British High Commission here in Ottawa, and yes, I guess we have the term Marshal of the Diplomatic Corps for the people who've been here the longest. So I guess out of the three of us, then that makes me the Marshal of this limited diplomatic corps here. So I'm also not going to, I think we're all going to take different perspectives on this, which hopefully is useful. I wasn't going to particularly talk about I guess the academic or the scientific, the research side in the UK. And of course, I think I would argue we're very strong. 17 universities in the global top 100, 4 in the global top 10. I think people know that kind of stuff, so I won't dwell on that here. So I thought I'd go down again. It's remarked upon in the author's remarks. But I guess a bit more around the deep tech angle on this. And I guess a kind of sister organisation to CCA, the UK's Royal Academy of Engineering. actually just pushed out a report 2 weeks ago. It started a series of writing annual deep tech reports on the UK. So again, if people are interested, then again, I recommend you to go and have a look through that, and you can start to draw some comparisons. I think it's interesting we can speak. Again, the UK has got some strengths here. Certainly within Europe, we're pushing pretty hard on the deep tech space. The RAN report places us third globally behind the US and China on deep tech, and it goes as far as suggesting that 18% of all VC funding going into quantum tech is going into the UK. So again, we feel like we've got some pretty good stats there to start backing up some of our strengths. We've also seen real development in the last few years on early stage startup funding as well. So again, this has been an area that the UK has kind of had some difficulties on. There's been a range of economic measures that both our finance minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, has put in, as well as supporting investment from foreign funders as well. So now we're starting to see some of the funding kind of reach that very early startup stages. However, much like Canada here, we very much struggle at later stage investment. And again, the Royal Academy of Engineering suggests something like a shortfall of somewhere around 4 to 11 billion US shortages, which would be, we're having to source them elsewhere because we don't have the capital markets in the UK to do that. That's despite, I'm sure what you hear my ministerial masters say around the strength of the City of London, and again, the financial hub that is. So we've still got that problem around availability of capital for those later stage companies, and like many others, kind of clearly into the US for some of that support. I thought it was also interesting looking at or hearing through the CCA findings, I guess, around some of the adoption challenges that are being faced. Again, the UK has this to some degree as well, encouraging some of our businesses to take up some of the technological benefits and advances that have been made. We've started doing that, I guess, in quite limited bespoke efforts, particularly on AI. So again, we've done sectorial wide focus on encouraging AI adoption, for example, in agri-tech, as an example. So some of those kind of other areas where we've tried to take, I guess, a bit more of a sectorial approach. I guess not too dissimilar from the global innovation clusters, although again, I note that there's some uncertainty now around those from my interpretation of the Canada budget issued a couple of weeks ago. So perhaps something to unpick around the success or otherwise of those, and how useful that has been or hasn't been in driving forwards some of those issues as well. I was also struck by I guess the peanut butter analogy in the report about trying to pick some priorities or not, and how you do apply that to your bread. I don't want to take that metaphor too far, but I guess I would say that again, the UK has started to do this a bit more in recent years. We have started to try to pick some winners. I mentioned quantum tech at the start. That's certainly one, but then also thinking on the place-based efforts as well. So again, thinking about how we can grow R&D clusters across the country, particularly, for example, life sciences, health tech in the northwest of England. Thinking about, we called it Silicon Fen, for those who know anywhere in the UK, that's kind of Cambridge area. Yes, exactly. And then as well as semiconductors in South Wales as well. So again, thinking a bit around place-based and how we're supporting, it tends to be led out of research institutions, but then how we're supporting and inculcating the innovation entrepreneurship around those as a kind of seed to start. So I guess they're the kind of the points I would make. Yes, we are blessed with the UK having a very genuinely world-class academic system, but I think starting to look around how it's applying to deep tech and pulling through innovation elsewhere as well. I'll leave it there.
Good, thank you, David. So the session is scheduled to wrap up, and so we are out of time, and I do apologize that we didn't have time to get to questions from the online audience. But in our final minute, I want to throw things back to Ilse for any final concluding remarks. Ilse.
I think what I would say, and it's really good to hear from these international voices that I think countries around the world are reevaluating what the future of STI is in a very much changing global context, and these rapidly developing technology platforms such as AI, the rise of nuclear, is another good example. So I think the conclusion is that this is a time for more collaboration. I think between allies and friends, we're deeply integrated and partners with these other countries, but it's not a one size fits all. Canada has been reluctant to make direct investments and use very much an indirect investment support system for business R&D through its SHRED program. And there's a lot more work to be done on the sector nuances, in particular, something that we couldn't get at. So it's time, I think, for a much more strategic, much more nuanced, much more real-time and adaptive innovation system that can deal with these fluctuations. Personally, I feel, despite the depressing data, I actually feel like this is Canada's wake-up call, and I'm a huge believer in the extraordinary talent and capacity we have in our human capital, which in the final analysis is what matters most.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ilse. And this draws this part of the session to a close. So please join me in thanking Ilse, Costanza, Kathy, David, and Tace, who had to leave early, unfortunately. Thank you all for.
Thank you.